We're
Good
live.
morning. Sorry. How
That's
are
okay.
you?
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. How are you?
I'm good. Um, I am here and ready to talk about ESE. Ooh,
I know. I know. It's the third section we're doing related to this ESC $150,000 no bid ESE report from the Sarasota County School District, where admittedly they say we've got problems, and they hired these two experts in the field to do a deep dive and offer them a report on what we need to do to correct some of the big concerns we have in this district related to students with special needs that are not meeting with progress in our very generous school district. Would you agree with that, Susan?
I would. I would say over the years, you and I have worked with a number of students who, by the time families get to us, we have kids who have struggled sometimes for years and years and years, and they've had IEPs, they've had parents that have been involved, they've had teachers that care, but we're not seeing these children make progress. And so when you put all those elements together and you're not getting the outcomes you're expecting, it's time for us to take a deep dive and really look at what can we do differently for our kids, because these are children with average IQs often, and there is no reason why they can't make progress with appropriate instruction.
Absolutely. And continuing to do more of what hasn't worked for years. And we don't mean a couple years. We mean 15, 20 years of evidence to show it hasn't been working. And we were screaming it from the rooftops. And basically, even we had candidates running for school board that were screaming it from the rooftops. And they were basically told by politicians not to talk about it. We don't want people to have our dirty laundry aired here. And that's a sore point with me, because just because you say something, again, it's watch what they do, not what they say. And we'll get into that more in this a little bit, not a deep dive, but just a little bit, because there's some things on our school board agenda today that actually reflect what should be a priority need, what they say is a priority need. And we'll show you in just a few minutes what they're really doing.
So do you want to jump in and get started? Because our first section we're actually talking about today is curriculum instruction.
Perfect. Category 6.
Category 6 of the report, if anybody's following, this report is available the Sarasota County School Board's website. It was presented to the school board on November 28th, 2023 in a workshop. And so you can go to their agenda for that day and you can get your own copy of this 98-page report. And it's actually, if you have a student in special education or you care about a student who's receiving special education in Sarasota, it is worth the time to take and flip through this, even if you only read the recommendations, but to understand the system that families are encountering when they're trying to get help for their struggling learner, and the problems that have been identified. I mean, these aren't things we made up. These are things that these two experts were paid to come in and ferret out in this district, and they've identified. And our experience over the years we've worked in Sarasota County, I think they nailed what they identified as being some of our problems. There was nothing really that they said that I went, nope, gosh, that's not really a problem. So
we see it all the time.
We do.
All the time.
We do.
So, yeah. So let's jump in. I think our first clip is Dr. Bambi Lockman talking about curriculum and learning.
Classrooms, and we went into some classrooms where they were struggling. And that's not unusual to Sarasota. But what is unusual is that it does not appear that there are curriculum frameworks in place for exceptional student education. Not strong curriculum framework, not curriculum framework that you can identify if you go to a North End school and see the same thing at the South End school. Now, obviously, there's a uniqueness to special education, and some curriculums have to vary. We get that. But at the same time, those frameworks, those curriculum subject areas, the teacher's use of the curriculum framework in the classroom needs to be more consistent. And there needs to be that opportunity for curriculum committees to actually formally put that together so that it's in place.
Did she just say we didn't have any curriculum?
That's what I thought I heard her say. And curriculum framework in particular, she was talking about, and that it is not consistent from one end of the county to the other. So rather than you and I go through this, I think we could jump right to the report and we could see what they had to say as they, and I want to remind everybody, they asked for data from the district in advance of coming here. And then they came to Sarasota and they visited 11 schools and they talked to district staff, they talked to building administrators, they talked to teachers, they surveyed teachers, they held 2 parent meetings, they surveyed parents. So they did a broad array of data collection, trying to figure out what is happening in Sarasota, what's working, what isn't, what feedback do people have about their different roles in this system. And from all of that, they then did an analysis, and this report is the culmination of all that information that they gathered. So let me get that on the screen for us. Give me just a minute. And let me make it a little bigger.
It's perfect. Oh,
And now we got to go a little bit smaller so that we can see the whole thing. Okay, so I'm going to jump in here. There are a few different focus areas. It's laid out the same as it has been all the way through. We have a category. Number 6 is where we're starting with curriculum and instruction. The first section is commendations, what's going well. And then we get into focus areas where they talk about things that require improvement. So they start out by saying strong curriculum and sound instruction are at the heart of any successful district. That students, their foundation is built upon having a sound instruction and curriculum. Sarasota has struggled with the utilization of a cohesive curriculum for special education. And when they went into special education classrooms, they found instruction was lacking. And I think that that aligns with the experience we've had working with families across the district. They did interviews, on-site visits. Sarasota provided evidence to them, to the company, and it was a document entitled Special Education Curriculum Framework. What they said about it was broad in scope, but loosely organized. So while this collection of various curriculum-related documents and frameworks provides some curricular and structure for Sarasota special education, it is limited, and in practice, there does not appear to be a consistent curriculum framework in place throughout special education in Sarasota. And in some cases, it appears that there's even a fundamental misunderstanding of curricula among many special educators in Sarasota.
I agree with that based on the many meetings we go to. Don't you, Susan?
I do. And, you know, we come at this from the parent perspective when we're helping families. We don't come at this from being educators. We are consumers of the product being offered by virtue of being the parent of children who went through this system. And so when you walk into that room, you expect that the educators that come to the IEP meetings are bringing this expertise with them. That, you know, parents are there to ask questions and inquiry and make sure that what is being offered to their individual child aligns with what they know about their child's needs. But there's a reliance on that the people who are the educators in the room come with an expertise in curriculum and interventions and understanding the difference between the two.
Well, and that's the problem. They don't, because oftentimes we'll be in the meeting and they'll talk about, we're in a meeting for a child with an IEP, which requires specially designed instruction. So we want to get down into the curriculum they're using, and they want to go back and talk about the interventions they're providing. And
Right.
those are two very separate conversations. But parents that are new to this are trusting and believing the educators in the room, as they should. And what we find in this report is the educators aren't being given either the professional development or the instruction or the materials that they need to do what they need to do to educate our children. And that's absurd in this district. Absurd.
Yep.
And it's been going on for far too long.
And just for people who are listening, they define here what is curriculum. It's what schools are attempting to teach students academically and behaviorally. That's pretty simple. It's a complex topic, but it's a pretty simple definition. It's a map. It's for what districts and schools want teachers to teach and students to learn.
Mm-hmm.
And what they say is without a solid and consistent curriculum in place, classrooms operate like a rudderless ship traveling with no direction or guidance. And I can tell you, as someone who tries to negotiate a contract of what you're going to do to help an individual student, when there isn't a clear map of what we are trying to accomplish, it becomes very hard to negotiate for something that nobody can define. So parents, if you're out there and you're confused in IEP meetings, this is part of what is leading to that confusion, because we do not have a clear picture of what your child is being expected to learn. And then if you have a child that learns differently, but you don't know exactly what you're trying to teach them, it's hard to negotiate how to make a unique plan for that child.
And we often hear when we do get them to drill down, well, we don't know. We don't know what we have. We don't know what we can use. Well, now we know why, because they really don't know what they have or what they can use.
Yes.
Shocking.
Because you do sometimes think, is there like a secret? Is there something that they just don't want to tell us? And it's like, nope, there's no secret. We're not in the dark. We're all together. Nobody has the light.
A $1.8 billion budget, and our job is to teach kids reading and math, and none of that $1.8 billion for kids that are about the same subset of quantity of students we have to teach goes towards purchasing anything that they can use to teach these children that learn differently. That is shocking.
Yep. So this report goes on to say, while some teachers have successfully accomplished this, others lack the direction that a curriculum provides. What is being taught to special education students, even students within the same program, can vary dramatically from classroom to classroom. And certainly we always talk about it, if you have a good teacher, you have a good year.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that this is part of that. Sarasota needs to develop a uniform curriculum framework for each of its special education programs and hold teachers and staff accountable for utilizing the prescribed framework. And I'm going to say one of Sue's favorite things to do is public records request. And for any of you parents out there who this, is speaking to you, it might be time to ask for the prescribed framework. You have the as a taxpayer, as a citizen, as a stakeholder, in part of an IEP team, you have a right to know what are these frameworks. There is not a one-size-fits-all curriculum that will be appropriate for special education in Sarasota. I want to, as you can see, I made it even a different color because I think as much as we want to talk about that these frameworks need to exist, we do need to understand that there still needs to be a continuum of services, a variety of options, and that not one thing is going to be appropriate for all learners. So there needs to be, the team needs to know what are our options, what's available. If we've done this and this child is not making progress, what do we do next? What else should we try? And this shouldn't be a shot in the dark or a gut instinct. We should be following science and evidence and know what's available. So their first recommendation was to form curriculum committees to formally develop curriculum frameworks for each Sarasota special education program and/or subject area and provide training to teachers on the use of the curriculum frameworks in their classrooms. Any thoughts on this before we leave this focus area?
No, I mean, it's not rocket science. It is something that should have been done years ago.
Yep. Okay, so we're going to move to focus area 6.2. Sarasota has a clearinghouse of information to inform special education. I'm sorry. I lost my train of thought. Sorry, I got distracted. They have a clearinghouse of information to inform special education teachers of the curriculum materials and interventions available to support students. But just having this clearinghouse is not sufficient to provide teachers with the necessary information that they need to make informed decisions for their students regarding appropriate curriculum, materials, or interventions. And remember, they need to know what the difference is between those three things. In some cases, when this company looked at, they encountered a misunderstanding among teachers as the difference between curriculum, resources, and interventions. A fundamental lack of understanding of what curriculum and a curriculum framework is or is not. Programs like iReady, how many of you out there, your children have used iReady?
Oh, take it away from it.
Or Orton Gillingham. And anybody that doesn't know, that's a program that's often used for students with dyslexia. But what they say is iReady and Orton Gillingham are effective if utilized consistently, yet they are simply interventions, not curricula. A curriculum is what we want and are required to teach students and is supported by resources and interventions that can help students who need additional reinforcement to understand the concepts. Some teachers have cobbled together various forms of curricula that they utilize in their classroom, but many teachers simply resort to a series of interventions rather than a true curricula. So, as a district, Sarasota has a plethora of curricular resources and interventions that are housed in schools in the central office. So it's not that we don't have anything, but people need to know what they are and when to use them. The Sarasota Special Education Department, along with special education teachers and administrators, must establish standards and parameters for what is used in the classroom as appropriate curricula, resources, and interventions. And so then they move on to talking about training and professional development. And they say that special education teachers in the district need training and professional development regarding materials and intervention, but there's a broader need for additional training on implementation and the use of curriculum for special education students.
And we're talking about all teachers here, because most of our special education students are in general education classrooms trying to learn. So all teachers need access to this information in these materials, in this professional development. Or you've got kids in classrooms not understanding, like they're not understanding anything they're being taught. And we've got teachers not understanding what they should be teaching.
And our ESE teachers, if we're expecting them to kind of guide this, they need specific professional development about each individual program. Because if you're going to teach something, you actually need to understand it. I mean, Orton Gillingham, a lot of those programs that certify teachers, it's a 2-year program. I mean, it's not a 3-day go sit in a seat somewhere and we're going to expose you to this to really learn how to deliver that kind of instruction. There's, it's a 2-year full program with they have to go and actually deliver the service, and that's overseen, and there's guided instruction for them to really become an expert in delivering Orton Gillingham.
Right. And Susan, parents are texting me that are listening as we're talking about this, and they're saying they didn't even know what to ask. They didn't know different things were available. And when they ask people in school, my child is struggling, what they're met with often is, oh, don't worry, they're making progress now. Everything's going better. And that's how the cycle of this occurs with our kids. And it just doesn't make any sense that I guess they talk about the customer friendliness of the problem that they have, but it's just all intertwined.
It is. I mean, it's hard sometimes to tease out which problem you're having because these things are all linked.
Right.
While instruction is different and customized to meet the individual needs of students, we hope, in each classroom and program, there should be evidence of established curriculum in every classroom. Teachers will adapt instructional practice and differentiate instruction for their student, but the curriculum framework provided by the district should have continuity across the district in grade levels and programs. Implementation of this framework should be monitored by administrators in the central office to ensure academic growth for students with special needs. And not really, I think, with where we get down to the rubber meets the road, when we looked at academic growth for our ESE students, for years and years and years, the gap has not closed between what non-disabled students are showing as proficiency and the amount of students with special needs or in special education are not making growth to close that gap. And so we know that part of not having a curriculum that is implemented with fidelity and understood by the people that are having to deliver it is part of the reason that our kids are not showing academic improvements. And once the further a student goes in school, the more that gap continues to grow, the harder it is to close.
Well, and we say all the time, until 3rd grade, we're teaching these children how to read. From 4th grade on, it's reading to learn. So if they don't know how to read by 4th grade, it is a very difficult gap to close.
And for anybody that might listen to this and you haven't been through it with your child or as sometimes a lot of our parents have went through it as students themselves, and then they watch their children have the same struggle. But I mean, it is not unusual for us to run into high school age students who are still reading at the 1st or 2nd grade level. I mean, you would be shocked how many kids manage, because a lot of times these kids are really smart. Mm-hmm. And so they are able to find a way to get their way through from grade to grade. But when we sit down and we do evaluations and we really look at why are they still struggling so much in school, they might be a 10th grade student and some of their reading scores are at the first or second grade level. How does that happen?
We've had teachers tell us, teachers in high school have told us they have classrooms full of students that can't read. And
Yep.
that is in very affluent, very generous, give us more money, Sarasota. Well, what are you doing with the money? It's not buying curriculum.
No. And it's not closing academic gaps.
Nope.
So Sarasota special education students are entitled to a high quality education, complete with appropriate instruction that is informed by the curriculum and delivered with confidence and fidelity. I have one thing to say to that. Amen. Like, it is the minimum expectation that we should have, that our kids are exposed to high quality education and appropriate instruction.
Well, and for those of you that don't know Susan, the fact that she just jumped to an amen should say something to everybody out there, because that's not the first place she goes.
It absolutely isn't. But I think sometimes I feel like divine intervention might be all of the hope we have. No,
Well,
I mean, really, it's so frustrating because we have just watched this year after year after year, and this is the minimum. This isn't like, I mean, this should be where we start from.
Yep. So first of all, we learn we don't have any curriculum. And then if you get some, or whatever you do have, how about what they said when they were presenting it is do some targeted professional development to show the teachers what they should be doing and explain to them what they should be doing. Well, we have board members that have been sitting on the school board that did this job for many years, or were tasked to and were paid to, and I'm sure are collecting pensions and benefits from that long career. Why aren't they diving in deep and fixing this problem immediately?
Absolutely. And I mean, this is kind of why public schools exist.
Yeah.
To teach kids how to read and write and do math.
That's right.
So just to conclude this, the recommendation in 6.2 was to establish standards and parameters for appropriate curriculum, materials, and interventions, and provide training to special education teachers, paraprofessionals, and staff on curricula that has been adopted by the district to be used in classrooms and programs. So I don't want to lose track of the first step of this is the district identifying and adopting the curriculum, and then making sure that the people who are in the front lines know what it is, know what the expectations are, know how to deliver it, know which students it's appropriate for. If their students aren't learning, what do you do next? How do you get help? Where do we pivot to? So there's a lot embedded in this statement. Okay, and then we move on to focus area 6.3. Classroom instruction throughout special education classrooms in Sarasota varies widely depending on the classroom, the programs, and the experiences of the classroom teacher. There are classrooms in Sarasota with experienced and well-trained teachers. And I have to say, we met a number of them through our career also. And it's like, hallelujah. This is, I guess I'm having my church moment today because we moved from amen to hallelujah. But I mean, truly, when you meet a really good teacher that knows what they're doing, you know that that child's going to have a stellar year. I can't tell you how many kids I know that have struggled, and then the parents like, I don't know what's going on this year, but I haven't had any phone calls. Well, it's because they're with an experienced teacher that knows how to teach the child and manage the behavior. It's amazing. In those classrooms where you have these well-trained teachers, they observe the implementation of strong instructional practices. There are examples of instructional excellence occurring throughout Sarasota special education every day. Instructionally strong and experienced teachers should be celebrated and used as models for special education instructional excellence within the district. I feel like they need like a star. You know what I mean? Like we need something that kind of glows around them that we can go, this is the model. If, if their fellow teachers are struggling, this is the one we want to pair them with to help them figure out how to do it. And then we have, unfortunately, special education teachers who just don't have the experience or the training to provide strong instruction in their classrooms. And they observe more of those who were instructionally weak than were instructionally strong. And it's a significant problem in special education in Sarasota. And so, and you know, we've talked about earlier that we have nationwide staffing shortages. So if we have these people who are in education, we've hired them, I think it's incumbent upon us to invest in the people that we have here and make sure we give them the development and the training to help them become better teachers, because that benefits our students. And one example that they have is that in many classrooms, there are students with significant behavior issues. One of the ways to combat behavior issues is to engage the students in what's being taught in the classroom through creative instructional practices. If students who have behavior issues are bored, and how many times have we heard that from parents? My kid is bored. Inappropriate behaviors continue to manifest because the lack of engagement in the material being presented. Strong, engaging instructional practices can and will draw students into the lesson. Some special education and teachers in Sarasota do not have the experience or the knowledge to adapt their instructional practices without assistance. It's vital that we provide these teachers with professional development. As curriculum frameworks are developed and teachers receive professional development regarding how to integrate the curriculum frameworks into their classrooms, there also needs to be simultaneous professional development focused on improving instructional practices in the classrooms. And so they recommend that the executive director of professional learning and leadership development, working with the chief of pupil support services and the chief academic officer, should determine the instructional needs of special education teachers in each building or program and develop specific professional development curriculum that addresses their instructional needs. Too many special educators in Sarasota lack the foundational knowledge of basic instructional strategies. And you know, I think we hear this from young teachers that they're coming out of their prep programs and they're like, I graduated, I have my degree, I earned my certification, but then I came into a classroom and feel like I am not prepared.
It's every level. We hear this in Sarasota. We're doing a lot of restructuring right now, and we hear from principals, and we see in meetings principals that do not understand what we're saying in the IEP meeting, yet they are now going to have cluster sites full of ESE students. So how are they going to guide teachers, which is your next section?
Yeah. So they're recommending ongoing coordinated professional development and coaching. And then they go through a list of the different ESE positions throughout the district, ESE liaisons, which now have a new name in Sarasota since this report. And then program specialists, who think they still exist at that title maybe, but they have a new job responsibilities. They've restructured a little bit. But they need to be able to provide instructional support to special education teachers and paraprofessionals in the classroom. And so at every level, we need to make sure that the people we're expecting to do these jobs have the training and support that they need. So that, because wherever the system's weak link is, that's where it breaks down. And
Mhm.
right now, we have, based on this report, a lot of weak links. So the bottom line, Sarasota has an obligation to ensure all students make progress toward achieving their IEP goals. This cannot be done in a meaningful way without curricular frameworks in place and without strong and consistent instructional leadership occurring in every classroom. And so the final recommendation here is to conduct an impact review of instructional practices throughout Sarasota school-based special education programs to assess the fidelity of curriculum framework implementation and the appropriateness of interventions, utilization of resources, determine programs and classrooms where instructional improvement is warranted, and provide targeted professional development customized to each school building and/or program to ensure that teachers have the knowledge and skills they need for instructional excellence. You know, Sue, I just had a thought.
Well, do share.
And it's, I mean, this is something new, so hold on to your shoes there. I feel like we almost need to like have a way for parents to know what the strength of the teacher they're getting. Because
Susan, we can't even in Sarasota County, we've met with lots of people. We can't figure out what teachers they're getting this next year. So
I
there's just,
understand.
we can say
but
all day long, we're transparent. We've got so much transparency, but I'm not seeing much of that. So I know what you're saying is very valid, but we can't even get the low hanging fruit.
you would just like the name of the teacher?
Yeah, I would. I would like to know. So we've got lots of parents considering what school to move to for next year, and we can't get names of teachers. But I will say, I went today to the, we're having a school board meeting today. And so I did go because I wanted to look and see if certain positions had been hired to help certain parents that were worried about questions that they were asking us. And interestingly enough, Susan, I don't think I've shared this with you. We've got different layers. In Sarasota, we've got lots of new chiefs we've hired. We've got lots of money floating around at high level positions being spent. And we are promoting people. The one case we are very familiar with is the DJ case in Sarasota. We are promoting people that were absolutely involved in that case at a school level. We are promoting them to higher district level positions with more responsibility. And you hear, we haven't done any training. We haven't helped these people learn anything. So why are we giving them more responsibility? And in the one case I'm thinking of, it is compliance related. So yeah, I haven't. What do you think of that?
It is astounding to me that we're going to do more of the same at a higher level and think we're going to improve or fix some of the things that are identified here that are problems. And this isn't about, you know, individual people per se. It is about the skill set, the knowledge, the expertise that they bring to the system that we're trying to fix. And
or is it because you did what we told you to do and you went to court and maybe didn't tell the truth on the stand, or maybe you have revisionist history that you get a promotion here in Sarasota? That is shocking to me, that we aren't following these clear guidance and directions of what we could do to really impact kids. Let me take a step back. We've got all this curriculum speak that we just paid $150,000 for in this report. And what I also saw in today's agenda is number 4 is they are approving our reading plan, our scientific-based reading plan today. They've got it on the consent agenda, which means nobody's going to discuss any of the reading plan of the $1.4 million. And it does not say how the reading plan is going to be funded. It talks about people they need. It talks about dollars they're going to spend. But we know from the workshop, they're proposing some of this funding to be from referendum dollars to fund this plan, which is appalling to me, because when you say that literacy is your priority, you shouldn't fund it with money you maybe are going to get in the future. Your budget should show your priorities. If we could see a complete budget, which we can't, we would know these details. But the other shocking part, Susan, that I'm going to share with you is, and we won't drill down into it because I think we need a different podcast for reading, but the programs that they are purchasing basically say components of fill in the blank program does not meet strong, moderate, or promising levels of evidence. So why are we continuing to use programs that don't show evidence of success?
This is something being reported in the report to the school board on the item that they're going to vote on today?
Yes, in detail. So the first one we're talking about is elementary school. And let me get it up. Elementary school.
Before you read this, we did just go through a whole report for the last half an hour that talked about that we need strong curriculum in Sarasota.
We
and
did.
I just want people who maybe who are listening to this to understand how these two issues are related.
So again, no conversation. We're not going to have any conversation. It's on the consent agenda. We've got $11.5 million it's going to cost. Not clear where that money is going to come from, if it's a priority or if the referendum passes, then we'll have these positions that they say we need to make this program be successful. And the curriculum that they're purchasing, by their own indication, does not meet strong, moderate, or promising levels of evidence. And then there's lots of edu-speak about what it could do and what it might do and what it does do for students in grades 4 through 9, but we're not talking about students in grades 4 through 9. We're talking about students in K through 5. So it's a lot of—
This is under the elementary section.
Correct. And then when we go to the K2 section, it's identical. This program does not meet strong, moderate, or promising levels of evidence. And then, however, we can see some strong gains if we support our Tier 1 curriculum.
And Tier 1 is the instruction that all students in general education classrooms are receiving.
Right. So the last piece I'm going to share with you before we get back to what our plan is. Now, this is our reading plan. So that should be the reading plan for all students in Sarasota. And on page 32 of this reading plan, it says, indicate the evidence-based programs and practices implemented for students with a disability, students with an IEP, and students who are English language learners as applicable. Students with a disability, students with an IEP, and students who are English language learners follow the district's decision trees for guidance in identifying the specific target area of intervention. The materials that are utilized are listed above, which may include, and then it lists what they may include, Amira, Orton-Gillingham approaches. That doesn't say Orton-Gillingham. Benchmark, Advance, Hello, Benchmark, Advance, Steps to Advance, and UFly. What it also doesn't say here is what they're recommending for Amira is an AI tutoring that is grant funded. That is for students.
AI, like artificial intelligence?
Yes. Yes. So this is all going to be approved today without any conversation after this report and after we know the majority of our students are not meeting with proficiency. It's not even the majority of our ESE students. It's the majority of all our students are not reading proficiently by grade 3. If you look at the numbers that we're going to see in the next section. So I'm sorry, I diverted you for just a moment, but I think it's shocking after this
So
report.
I think what we want people to walk away and know is that there's additional money getting ready to be spent for future curriculum that's going to be implemented in our schools, I'm assuming for this next school year. And it is not clear how the recommendations we just read have been taken to heart as they built this plan. It's not defined in there. Is that I didn't read it, but that's your understanding, is that it is not defined very well. So what we're going to do specifically different for ESE students.
Or how we're going to fund it. So 1 point in total, including the referendum for next year, in Sarasota, with less students than we had last year, our budget's going to increase to $1.8 billion. And I hear all the people on the campaign trail talking about how transparent they are about this budget. That just simply isn't true. We cannot look at a school level budget and determine where these classrooms are, where supports are going to be placed, where specific personnel are going to be placed. So if you have a new principal, a new teacher, a new SLP, parents should be aware of that before they try to figure out where their children should be at school for next year. Would you agree?
I would agree. And I think that was one of the things when we get to the parent section of this report, that the building trust comes from transparency and parents being treated like partners in their child's education and having the same information available to them that school folks have as they're trying to help their children and make good decisions for them. So I agree 100%.
Right. And I think we need to go back and do a different podcast about reading and go back and look what was presented at that workshop as opposed to what they're approving and what the numbers look like, which I think we get into right now, what the numbers look like.
Data, your favorite section. Hang on just a minute. Here we go. Okay, so again, at the beginning of data, they tell you what's going well in Sarasota, and if you want to read it, it's there for you. But we're going to skip to section focus area 7.1. Data is important to determine individual student growth and progress, or lack thereof, as well as to determine the efficacy of instruction for special ed kids in Sarasota. With this team, they explored the data being collected and utilized for special ed in Sarasota. They based it on observations in classrooms, conversations with district administrators, school building leaders, and teachers. It appears that data utilization is inconsistent at the school level and at the district level. It's apparent that some teachers and staff who are not entirely familiar with methods of progress monitoring and data collection. It's important to note that this does not suggest the data isn't being collected. Progress monitoring occurs in many classrooms. However, teachers and administrators are generally not actively utilizing the data collected. And boy, have we seen that. Data does not always appear to drive IEP decision-making for goals, student placement, and/or progression within programs. There is no evidence that indicates there's a deliberate intent to ignore or underutilize student data, but rather there appears to be, and here we're going to sound like a broken record, lack of training, understanding, and confidence among staff on the process of data collection, data analysis, and data utilization. And so parents, for you, If you went to an IEP meeting and the present levels of performance, which is how is your child doing right now, what are they capable of, wasn't clear to you, that's some of what this is talking about. That they have data, but they don't know what to do with it. They don't know how to express it. They don't know how to analyze it in order to incorporate that even in IEPs to drive what do we do next.
Well, and sometimes we hear selective utilization of data. So if we want to show this child is capable, we're going to plunk out all the pieces on their best day, as opposed to maybe the struggles it took and how we got to that best day, because we've reread this piece 86 times before we were proficient at reading this piece, or whatever that may be. But yes, it's a problem. And we know the district is very good at collecting data. We know they can drill down to the child very early. We know they put classrooms together, and again, it's back to the teachers not understanding when they're looking at what red, yellow, and green on that child's dashboard looks like, what that actually means.
And what do they do with that information?
Mm-hmm.
So the first recommendation is provide special education teachers, paraprofessionals, related service personnel, and staff with consistent professional development on how to accurately collect data, how to analyze the data, how to utilize the data in the classroom, and how to preserve data as a vital component of the student's record for IEPs, placement, and future decision making. And I agree wholeheartedly.
Yep, me too.
Okay.
I think we have a clip here of Todd talking about this next section. Yes.
Okay, let me figure out how to get him to be able to talk about that. Hang on just a minute.
Out of this report, we have a number of areas that are very significant and areas that we think are important to focus on. This section is one of the most important in my mind. When we look at the achievement gap in Sarasota special education, it does exist, and it is something that is problematic. When we look at data, we went back 5 years and looked at data. This both for ESE students, or excuse me, for ELA students, and for mathematics, for our student data. This is the data that you have in the report and on the board is data that is coming directly from the state of Florida. And when we look at that, there are a few things to point out here. First and foremost, when we look at ELA and math, those two areas are very similar across the board. We have some variances, of course, but for the most part, ELA and math are in lockstep when you look at the student achievement data in this district. So it's not one versus the other here. It is a problem throughout. One thing that I think is important to point out as a commendation is when we look at our level 1 data, when we look at data, just to be clear, level 1 is our lowest level of data, right? When we look at that's the lowest level of achievement all the way up to level 5, okay, being the highest level. When we look at our level 1 student data, Sarasota is achieving better than the state average in that level 1, which is commendable. That is a great thing that this district is doing. We think that's really important. However, as we move to through those levels, it becomes a bit more problematic. The challenge here is we know that our students, many of our special needs students are going to be in that level 1. It's not surprising to see higher percentages of students there than in level 5. That just naturally makes sense. We have students who are not achieving at those level 5 levels. That's where our high achieving general education students are at level 5. So we don't see nearly as many. So it's not problematic to me to look at that and say, oh, we have 1.6% of our students at level 5. That's not the concern. concern. The concern is that we have 1.6% of our special ed students at level 5, and we have a gap of our regular ed students there. We have an achievement gap that occurs as we look down every single one of those levels that has existed in this district for at least the last 5 years. Year over year, we see no narrowing of that achievement gap. It is nearly consistent within a percent or so each year. What we'd expect to see there is that when we identify that there's a gap that was done a number of years ago, we expect to see processes and procedures put in place to narrow that gap. Even if it's just a small amount every year, we'd expect to see that. That's
Coming back to you, I promise.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. What did you say?
I said I'm trying to get the report back. Give me just a minute.
So he went back 5 years, but in the last show, I think we had Karen Rose, the school board chair, saying this gap extends far prior to COVID. So
Yes.
we've had a problem for a long time.
Yes. And so this next section goes through these charts where they look at every 5 years. And then there's a second chart where they look at math, and math is similar to ELA without going through all the numbers. We're looking at similar gaps between what ESE students are, for how they're performing versus their non-disabled peers. They do a little bit better in math, but not, it's pretty steady. And then they look at the district results for achievement levels for 2018. It's a similar chart, but they just do it in bar graphs instead of, I'm just going to slide past these charts. And what they talk about is that although we have lower numbers of students in level 1 than the state, we have higher levels of students in level 2 than the state. And then our 3s, 4s, and 5s are similar.
So what that means, Susan, we have higher levels at number 2, which is not proficient, than the state average. Is that correct?
Correct. So where a lot of the state has their ESE students, a lot of them scoring level 1s, in Sarasota we have more kids scoring level 2 than level 1, but they're not getting to 3, 4s, and 5s. That any more than the rest of the state is. So we have growth that needs to happen. And so they do these charts for 2019, for 2021. 2020 they didn't do because of COVID. And so here it says, one of the significant challenges faced by Sarasota is the achievement gap between general ed and special ed students. It's been ongoing in Sarasota for many years and has not been rectified. And so we keep going, and now we're looking at it for 2022, and the chart looks similar. It's a tremendous cause for concern. These significant gaps occur year over year with no evidence of meaningful progress at narrowing the achievement gap. The district continues to engage in the same activities using programs and interventions that are not effective, despite the fact that the achievement data demonstrates that there is little to no impact on student achievement or narrowing of the achievement gap. Special education students are being left behind academically. And years of focusing almost exclusively on compliance by the ESE department has not helped that. And student achievement cannot be ignored for compliance. So what they recommend is conducting a thorough analysis of the achievement gap in Sarasota special ed to determine the underlying causes and develop a detailed 5-year plan to narrow the gap with a focus on increasing student achievement for special ed students in Sarasota.
And that recommendation, they wanted to have done within 6 months. It's been within 6 months since they delivered the report, hasn't it, Susan?
Yep, November 28th of 2023, and it's now July of 2024. So more than 6 months have elapsed.
And they were pretty clear in the last section about what created some of the problems. And then we just learned 11 point something million dollars doing more of what they did last year.
Yep. And so the last area in this section is looking at student behavior data. And they go through talking about that Sarasota has adopted a program called Total Progress System. It was developed by a BCBA. It's very detailed. It can generate a lot of reports, and it gives a lot of percentage kind of data. They're not particularly easy to read for a lot of people. We hear that from parents.
And teachers.
And teachers. In this states, it's voluminous and extremely detailed, but not always intuitive or easily understood. Many teachers and staff who collect the classroom level data do not even review it or have a full understanding of the reports that are generated. And so if they're going to keep using this, then they need to be trained to fully understand the relevant data. And so what they say is it's important for the standardization and the delivery of the data to parents so that teachers don't spend hours writing explanation of the data provided.
Well, and I will say to parents that are listening, we've been in regular IEP meetings, and we've been in manifestation determination hearings where this has been used. And when we ask for the raw data, what the teachers actually put in, it was not easily forthcoming. And we maintain that should be part of their education record. If teachers are putting in data related to your child, ask for that data, because
the tally sheets where they're collecting it, not the analyzed computer generated portion of it.
Right, because it's very interesting sometimes when you get down to the nitty gritty, what's really going on as opposed to the narrative people would like you to believe that is going on.
And so the fourth section, and I'm just going to cut to the end here, is that we should be using data-driven decision making. And it should be at the core of the development and implementation of the special education data policy. And so what they recommend is develop and implement a special education data policy that creates a standard for student data collection, usage, and storage that is focused on student achievement, placement, interventions, and supports. So that is the end of our data section. Any thoughts on data beyond what they identified, Sue?
No, I think they did a good job. I'm disappointed to see that we aren't doing anything differently based on all of this from what we can see. If we are doing something differently, it would be nice to know what that is, and hopefully before the school year starts, we'll understand some of these things a little better.
And so I think the last section we're going to cover today is transitions. And that was my transition to transitions.
Perfect.
And so when they talk about transition here, anybody that has a child with an IEP, when you think of transition, you might think of that plan we put when your child, becomes 11 now in Sarasota. You start talking about transition planning. And then really as they're getting ready to exit high school, you have a transition plan to like what what are they going to do for post-secondary ed? What are you going to do for employment? What are you going to do for independent living? But this is a broader look at transitions from pre-K to kindergarten, from 5th grade to middle school, from middle school to high school. So each place where your child is having a change from one place to the next, they look at what supports need to be in place to make that easier on the child and to make sure that they're being set up for success as they make that transition. And so one of the things that they use is an ESE transfer checklist, but it's underutilized and it's missing some procedural components. It's also when we have kids that are transitioning from out of state or from out of county. So anywhere that we're having a child that's moving from one place to another, we should be looking at what are the components of that we need to have in place for success. And so it's specifically talking about students that are coming to us from out of state or out of county. One of the things that they identified is, and we've seen this, we've had families call us, when the student comes here, they are initially being placed in programs that do not meet their needs, and they can stay in those inappropriate settings for months, depending, despite the input from receiving schools, thereby impacting the student's progress. And I will say that because it's the parent side we usually hear, it's also with the parent advocating, this is what my child has had, this is what my child needs. And often their child is still placed inappropriately, and it really takes a lot of effort and time to get them moved and into something that's supporting them appropriately. All transitions are extremely significant for students with disabilities and should be handled strategically and with the knowledge and understanding of the individual student's specific needs. And I just went through all the different types of transitions that we have. They identified some specific problems with the pre-K area, that the pre-K IEPs that for kids that are now moving to kindergarten do not reflect what is needed in kindergarten. Their goals and objectives are not appropriate, and that pre-K classrooms do not look the same, nor are they equipped with quality curricula that are consistently utilized across district programs. So here we, another instance where curriculum is the problem. And so they have a few recommendations for this area. One is to readdress the ESE transfer process, revise the checklist, focus on working closer with school-based administrators to prevent transfer students from being initially placed in programs that do not meet their needs and often staying there for months despite input from receiving schools. And then recommendation 81B, redesign pre-K transition to ensure effective transition planning, timely evaluations, and development of a student IEP for kindergarten reflects what is needed in kindergarten, provide equitable resources for pre-K classrooms, equip programs with appropriate developmental curriculum, and pilot kindergarten transition classes. And I didn't go through that, but what they talked about is we have some students that are aging out of pre-K but aren't quite ready for kindergarten. And so they're recommending a transition classroom to help build those skills before the child actually enters the kindergarten program. Then 8.2, we talk about that grade level transitions are important and that they can also be traumatic for students. Right now, there's very little planning time that's allocated for these transitions to happen smoothly. So in some cases, the process is lengthy, and in other times, there's no opportunity to observe or visit another site. We should be identifying supports and services that are going to go with the student. At cluster sites in Oak Park, support such as communication devices or a paraprofessional are often not transferred with the student. So if we have a student that's in a gen ed or traditional school, their home school, and they're needing more support that can be provided there, and then so we're looking at moving to a cluster site or moving to Oak Park, we should really look at what supports and services that are on that child's IEP need to move with the child. And that's not currently happening all the time. Quality relationships and mutual respect are important during transition between schools, and well-defined school-to-school processes should be adhered to across the district. Then they talk about in 4th and 5th grade, we should be looking at preparing children for the transition to middle school. They should have multiple opportunities to visit the middle school, sit in the classroom, meet teachers and support personnel, observe potential electives. And it's about making the child feel comfortable in the new environment, potentially reducing behavior incidents and increasing the ability to focus. And then a similar strategy for kids who are going from 8th grade to high school. Lack of adequate support for middle school students has existed in Sarasota for many years. Addressing the missing middle school program and developing a strong continuum of services is necessary. They need classes there like unique skills and learning strategies, as well as a self-contained classrooms if that's necessary for the student. And I'm just gonna, share personally, when my son many years ago made the transition to middle school, the summer between 5th and 6th grade, they had I'm sure it was grant funded because it didn't happen the following year, but they had a transition program where he spent a couple of weeks at the middle school with a teacher and a group of kids, and they learned the campus, where all the places where were their classrooms, because they already had their schedule. They followed their schedule. They learned where the cafeteria was. It was sort of that hidden curriculum of how to navigate middle school. And it was such a great transition for him into 6th grade. He felt like he had the knowledge he needed to walk in and not be anxious and scared. And I'm so sorry that that isn't something that's available to all of our incoming kids, especially ESE kids who have so many other challenges that they're navigating as they make these transitions.
Well, again, I think that's priorities. It definitely, how we are allocating money and how we are funding things in this very generous budget should be, first of all, transparent. Just because you say you are doesn't mean you are. So parents can know maybe that's happening at this middle school and not that middle school. But because I do know, Susan, it happens at some schools. I know we do a little bit better at some schools than others, but nothing like what you just explained.
Yeah, no, and I think it was maybe 2 weeks. It wasn't super long, but it made a huge difference for my kid to feel confident walking into that classroom.
Well, and think about our little ones. Our little ones coming from new schools. So many people have moved here. We've got an influx of, well, we know we have an influx of little ones on the spectrum. And what are we doing? From the calls we're getting from parents, what we're doing to help parents transition to Sarasota County schools when your children are little needs improvement.
It absolutely does. And just having everybody know what's available would be a good start.
Right. I mean, we've had parents call and say they begged the schools to say, please, can we meet? Please, can I tell you about my child? Oh, don't worry. Don't worry. And, you know, we have a lot of parent unfriendly campuses now. It's not like you can just walk in and be with your child as we used to be able to do that. Maybe some of the schools now are letting you walk in and drop them off, but certainly it takes an act of Congress to observe your children during the day.
And you know, when we get to the section 10 of this, it's about parents, and I think we have a lot of thoughts on that parent relationship that needs to be built in this district.
And as we wrap this up, I think this final clip might be a good time to play that final clip right about now, if we're moving to 8.3.
Okay.
Difficulty transitioning, there needs to be multiple opportunities to go to their new site. They need to see what a real classroom looks like at their new school. They need to have an opportunity to see to have those supports in place and to know that they may or may not have that same friend, their para, that's going to be transitioning with them. If we can enhance that process for transition and that preparation for our students that are most challenged, I would anticipate that the success rate would skyrocket and our behaviors would be reduced because they're walking into a comfortable environment versus an environment that scares them to death with so many people. And if you start the transition process early in January, February, those kind of things would be an option.
So I think she was delivering this in November, so giving it 9 months, hoping that we would have done some of those things this year.
Yes.
And I haven't seen them.
You know, I feel like actually this year, because of the expansion of where particularly because we do a lot of work with families of children with autism. And this year, with the expansion of more sites where they're serving kids in clusters, you know, in schools where they've never been before, and that those decisions on who's going to staff them and what it's going to look like at each of those individual schools, I would say this has been one of the hardest summers I've seen for families in trying to prepare their children and make decisions on, you know, I used to be assigned to this school and now I've been assigned to a different school, but I have choice of maybe some other schools, and how do I have enough information to know which school is the right one for my child? And honestly, you know, we know families who have multiple autistic kids in their individual households. And the right school and the right teacher for one of their children would not be the same answer for one of their other children. It's really individualized when you have kids with unique needs. And so understanding who's where, what's available, how's it going to be staffed, who's the administrator, what knowledge do they have of autism, what training have they received, what support is coming to them from the district. If the district knows the answers to all those questions, is not evident to the community. There's a disconnect between the internal knowledge and communication and what they're sharing publicly, even when you know the right questions to ask. So, well, I think that got us, we're almost to the end. We have 2 more sections to go. In our next, we will talk about section 9, which is, I can't remember. Oh, training and professional development. And then section 10 is parents and parent involvement. And again, I think we have a lot of thoughts because that's the seat we've sat in for a very long time with our own kids and with the families that we serve. And so, I don't know. To me, there is hope, there's excitement, about what's possible in the future. There's also fear and frustration that it's so hard to bring in what we know works, and get it instituted.
Well, we know how to affect change. And how to affect change is building a community of educated, empowered community members and parents to hold the school board members accountable for doing what they say they're going to do, and further doing what they say they're doing. Because just because they stand up there and say they're doing something, like the last budget workshop we watched, it was kudos to the staff and how wonderful everybody was. Not that we don't believe they're working hard, and not that we don't believe there's good people in the school district, but if you keep doing the same thing that isn't working over and over and over again and expecting different results, you've got a problem. And we've got a mass exodus of students from this district. We are an A-rated district with people, knocking down doors to get in, although I think our buying of properties has slowed a little bit, but certainly the last couple of years we've had huge influxes. We've built new schools, and if we don't change what we're doing within the classrooms of the new schools, we are not going to be delivering faith to our special education students. And until we can unite and have a common voice, I think that's where the power is, Susan, is having parents come together and understand this stuff and go to meetings educated and empowered, and all of the other things you need to do to educate your child.
And I really think that this report, why we've spent so much time going through it, is it gives parents a blueprint to know what they should be able to expect. And so if you're not getting what this report says should be what we're doing, it helps you to know what questions to ask and what to demand that it be put in place so that your child is learning.
And those IEP meetings are intimidating. Record them. Notify your ESE liaison. I don't know, whatever the policy says. And thank you, school board members, for all my critiquing. That was one good thing that's been done in the past 4 years, is they codified and put into policy things we were able to do for the past, as long as I can remember. And then under the last school board, it got removed from us because they didn't want us to record school board meetings, even though in the one time
IEP meetings.
That's IEP meetings. Even though the one time we did have to take them to court and prevailed, or twice, we did not use a single recording at all. But they're worried about that. Although they say they're worried about what, parents putting it on social media and all these other crazy things. But a lot happens in a meeting and you can't remember it all. So a recording is the best memory refresher and evidence that you have that something was approved or denied or discussed, or
if the system crashes, what actually happened.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, we've been in that boat too, where everything entered is suddenly poof, gone, and you've got to go back and recreate it. So if you have a recording, that makes that a little easier. Well, I mean, it's better than starting over.
Oh, absolutely. And by the system crashing, Susan means the IEP writing system that the district uses if it doesn't work properly, which, as she said, has been our experience.
It's happened. Mm-hmm. So, all right. Well, I need to run, but it was great to be with you today. And thank you for helping to enlighten me on some of what's happening currently in the meeting today. And we will be back on Thursday to finish up this report and to talk about what we're going to talk about next.
Perfect. Have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.